gentlemen, good afternoon for this commemoration of an historic event, man's first foray in space, the 50th anniversary of which we are commemorating today. So first, I would like to introduce the two moderators. So myself, I am Philippe Jung, the chairman of the Historic Committee, and Igor Sorokin, who is in charge of the human spaceflight session with astronauts. Okay, so first, a quick summary of how we came to this situation of the flight of Gagarin. You may remember that it was the time of the Cold War, at a time when there were American bombers all around Soviet Union. And the only solution for the Soviet Union at the time was to have a huge rocket, which was designed by Korolev, Sergei Korolev. And you have here this picture of this first rocket. The next step was, after some fight by Korolev, to try to impose or to obtain from the military who were in charge of the rocket in Soviet Union to be allowed to launch it with a satellite. And then we came to this historic event of the 4th of October 1957, when the first artificial satellite of the Earth was launched. That was a huge event at the time, and actually the impact was much bigger than even Khrushchev at the time expected. So the next step obviously would be to fly somebody, to fly a man in space. And for this, the first question was, would it be possible for a man to survive there? And the answer came very quickly, 1 month later, with Dog Laika, who survived. But then the next question was, of course, if you send a man in space, you have to recover him safely. And in this case, the Americans were the first to recover a satellite with Discoverer 13. This is a picture of Discoverer 14, actually. So the space race was on. Who would be the first to launch a man in space? And it's interesting to see now that actually the first cosmonauts, the first astronauts to be selected were the American ones, as soon as in 59, as soon as NASA was created. And interestingly, the Soviets did it 1 year later only. Probably they were sure of being the best at the time. And with a huge team of 20 cosmonauts. You can recognize Gagarin just beside Korolev. And here is the historic day that we are commemorating today. You have here a picture of Gagarin on the left and of his spacecraft Vostok on the right. Okay, so now I will start the presentation of the various panelists. The first one, of course, will be our Soviet friend, Russian friend now, Valery Ryumin, who was selected in 1973 as a member of the engineers group. And as you can see on the slide, he made 4 flights, including 2 world record duration flights. So, concerning this session, I would like to stress that it will be a question and answer session. So there will be 2 people around in the amphitheater with a piece of papers where you can put your question, and this question will be collected, and then we'll make the answer from whoever has to answer. So, as a first step, I will ask to our 4 astronauts the same question. If they could speak very briefly, very short, about the first astronaut flight in their country, and then what was the impact of this flight and what happened in their country over the following 50 years. So please, Valérie.
Ну, сейчас трудно говорить. Во-первых, прошло столько лет. Когда был первый полет Гагарина, вообще никто не представлял, что это такое.
It's so difficult for me to speak about that now because it happened so many years ago. And actually, when the flight happened, nobody could even imagine what it really was.
Естественно, я себе это не мог представить. А представить себе, что простой человек мог полететь куда-то в космос, было вообще-то невозможно.
I couldn't even think about it. Nobody could imagine how a human being can get to space, to the place nobody knew actually how it all be.
Поэтому лично вот на мою биографию, как бы, полет Гагарина не оказал никакого воздействия.
So actually, for me, Gagarin's flight did not make any special impact.
Вот будет там следующий вопрос. Как я стал космонавтом? Вот на этот вопрос я могу подробно рассказать, тем более, что я вообще никогда не рассказывал, вот на эту тему не говорил.
Actually, we are going to have some more questions, and then I can be more personal, and I will tell you the details of my biography that I have never ever told anybody.
Дело в том, что я после института занимался вот на фирме «Энергия», фирма, на которой работал Сергей Павлович Королев, и которая делала все спутники и последующие корабли. Я занимался наземными испытаниями.
Actually, after I graduated from the university, I worked for the Korolov's company, and my responsibility was ground tests.
И мы, начиная в 70-м и 71-м году, сделали первую станцию «Салют-1».
And in 70 and 72, I was involved in the design and manufacturing of the first space station, Salyut-1.
И в 71-м году полетел экипаж Волков, Добровольский и Пацаев, которые влетели тогда на длительный полет, 24 дня.
And actually it was the crew of Volkov, Dobrovolsky and Patsayev who spent in space 24 days. And it was the longest space flight by that time.
По тем временам это был очень длительный полет.
Actually, it was so very long from the standpoint of that time.
И вот когда в ночь, когда они садились, я пришел на работу и узнал, ну, очень быстро мы узнали, что аппарат-то сел, но экипаж погиб.
At night, when I came back to the office, I learned that the spacecraft landed, but all the crew members were dead.
Вот тогда я подумал, что погиб он в том числе и потому, что был не очень готов к этому полету.
And I realized that one of the reasons the crew died was because the crew was not perfectly ready and well trained for the flight.
Ну, а так как я был молодой, горячий и самонадеянный, то я подумал, что вот если бы я там сидел, то я бы не погиб.
And since I was very young and very inspired and very self-assured, and I thought, if I had been in their place, I wouldn't have died.
Как потом выяснилось, что они действительно были не очень хорошо готовы к полету.
As we found out later, they were really not very well trained for the flight.
Тому были объективные причины.
And there were objective reasons for that.
Дело в том, что тренажеров в то время никаких не было.
Actually, we didn't have any training and simulation facilities then.
Документация полетная была очень сырая.
Flight documentation was very raw,
В ней было масса ошибок.
with a lot of mistakes.
Но если бы они по ней работали даже, там была такая ошибка, которая помогла бы им выжить. Но они плохо ее знали, эту документацию.
But actually, if they had followed the flight documentation properly, there was some mistake in this documentation that could have helped them to survive. But they didn't learn the documentation very well. And this is the reason for this tragedy.
Если бы они по ней работали, то они бы остались живы, хотя там были ошибки.
So I mean to say that even if they had followed the documentation precisely, they had a chance to survive.
Вот тогда я решил, что мне надо идти в космонавт.
And it was at that moment that I decided to become a cosmonaut.
Okay, thank you very much, Valerie, who is now. who is now the Deputy General Designer of the Energia company. Okay, now we are switching to our American friend with astronaut Kathy Coleman, who was selected in '92. And as you can see, she made 3 flights, including one recently, 2 on the space shuttle and 1 with the Russians. And you can notice also that she flew with the first female commander of the space shuttle. So it was an interesting flight. Okay, so please, Kadi, with the same question.
Well, I was 4 months old when Gagarin flew, so I don't have great memories either. But, and actually this, since I wasn't, an adult during that time, I wanted to do a little homework, and not that he was either, but I spoke with Andy Chaikin, who's written a number of historical books and films on the history of the space program, trying to understand why we do these things. The reaction to Gagarin's flight was, I think, extreme in the United States. In that Shepard's flight came just a few weeks later, or months later, excuse me. And it was something, I think that the U.S. couldn't believe that this had happened. And it galvanized the U.S. to be motivated, I think, in 2 ways. One was that people were so impressed and amazed, just as Mr. Ryuman discussed, that a person could go to space, that it created a great amount of excitement in the U.S. And then there's the spirit of competition. And that is what drove, I think, the early exploration, the early Apollo flights. This was a way to demonstrate, it was a vehicle, the space program was a vehicle for what I would call soft power. It was a way for us to demonstrate technical, military, economic strength without having a shooting war. This was our way of having a shooting war with our colleagues that we now sit next to and have flown next to up in space. One of my crewmates is in the audience as well from Expedition 26, Sasha Kaleri. And I think that things are different now in terms of our motivation to go to space. If you look at the early astronauts, I think that you'll find that either personally they were driven to go higher and faster in an individual way, but also with a large nationalistic motivation. And maybe it makes me less of an American, but I will tell you that my motivation to go to space did not have to do with wanting to demonstrate that America was the best and had a certain place in space. I'm proud of that. And at the same time, my motivation was that I think people should be in space. And somewhere between the early 60s and now in 2011, 2012, I think that the motivation of the space programs has changed to be more about people in space. And I don't know what the cause of that change is. My theory is that when we started to learn things in terms of science, geology, these discoveries, geology, geography, all the astronomy that we began to discover when we as a people, all of us, the Russians, us, other people, going to space with robots, with satellites, with manned vehicles, when we started to discover our universe, I think it joined us together. And I personally hope that meetings like this will help us really to use that motivation to go further, to go to the places that we already live, we just haven't been there. And I look forward to discussing this. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Kadi. Now we are switching to Europe. And with Thomas Reiter, who is now the chief of astronauts in ESA. And he was selected in '92 and performed 2 flights, perfect, one with the shuttle, one with the Soyuz. And as you can see, he's the European astronaut which has the longest flight in space. So same question, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. have to say I was just a little bit older than Kathy when Yuri Gagarin flew 3 years about, but still, I mean, I don't remember this event from personal, but of course, everyone was talking about it. And if we think back about what response that caused in the media, it is still overwhelming today. If we think about the fact that it took only 7 years from the moment that the first human was flying into space until the first human was putting his foot on the moon, I think it's remarkable what has actually happened in this short time. And sometimes I'm just trying to imagine if we would have continued with this pace. Anyhow, I think this opened the era of human spaceflight, and there were many to follow on eastern side, on western side, and certainly in Europe, a couple of astronauts, cosmonauts, followed the path of these first men and women who were flying to space. It was in Eastern Europe. It was Vladimir Remek from the Czech Republic in 78, and others in Western Europe. It was Jean-Luc Chrétien from France, and others. And now we are having about 40, almost 40 European astronauts that had flown to space. And Kathy, in fact, was with one of my European colleagues, Paolo Nespoli, on board the ISS. And was working there. So obviously from this area of in this Cold War regime of competition, it has evolved into a time where we are cooperating. And there are a lot of fora around that have been in the meantime discussing what can be the way forward. We have a fantastic space station in orbit we saw before these pictures, and I'm sure we will get to discuss a little bit about that, which we are utilizing now for at least till the end of this decade, and I'm sure also well beyond that. But we also will make the directions to go beyond low Earth orbit with humans again, and that will be very, very exciting. We will have the chance later to discuss a little bit about the benefits, but one thing is obvious, and I think all here have already touched that. It is the fact of international cooperation. The possibility to look at our own planet from outside gives a different feeling, and I know a lot of my colleagues have expressed that already. So I think we are talking from our own experience that this gives the feeling that it's really an endeavor by the whole humankind. Space has brought humans together. The ISS is a sign for it. And I think those path that was started by Yuri Gagarin is now become a fantastic path for humankind in general, and with still a lot of very, very interesting and challenging aspects ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I remind you can ask a question on the written shape on the sheet of paper circulating. So now we are turning to Japan, and with Shaki Mukai, who, by the way, was a former ISU teacher, and she's now working with JAXA. So as you can see, she made 2 flights, each time with a space shuttle, and one of these interesting flights was with John Glenn, of course, an icon. So please, if you can answer quickly the question. Thank you very much, Shaki.
Thank you very much. Well, to talk about the Gagarin's flight, actually, I was so impressed by his what he did, because I clearly remembered that time. So if I say something like that, which means I'm elder than these guys, because it is not exaggeration to say my life was superimposed by the 50 years of human spaceflight history. Because when I was 9 years old, Gagarin flew. And I was so excited to read about the book. And then, as a matter of fact, 3 people during my childhood, well, the one is a little bit elderly, but the 3 people during these 50 years is my hero. Yuri Gagarin, Tereshkova, and also the Neil Armstrong. So the Neil Armstrong flew. I was a high school student. So we were so excited. We as Japanese people are very much excited, but maybe different way to excite from the way that U.S. people was excited or maybe a little bit threatened, I guess. So we are excited, but you know that at that time to become an astronaut or to fly into space was not a dream, realistic dream of Japanese children, because at that time only big countries like Russia and also the Soviet Union and also the United States had the space program, not in Japan. So my first dream was to become a medical doctor. And so I was excited by the space program, but was not the dream when I was, possible dream when I was a child. But I remembered 1962, 1 year after his Gagarin's flight, he came to Japan. And then he did a big parade, so many people excited. Of course, at that time, I was 9 years old, so I knew only the way that children understood the world. But was so excited. I see some pictures, and also he gave a lot of lectures to meet many people, important people in Japan, something like that. And then, to me, I think the word he actually said from the space was the one that is most memorable, which is made us realize that this is the blue planet. So that was the one that I was very much impressed. So that's how Gagarin's flight, he paved the way for us to entering the new world, impacted to us in Japan.
So thank you very much, Chiaki. Then I would like to mention another country, because as you know, there are 3 countries in space now, in human spaceflight, and the other one is China. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a Chinese speaker, but it should be reminded that they'd be flying with a highly modified Russian Shenzhou, modified Soyuz called the Shenzhou in China. And you have here a picture of the first Chinese astronaut, Yang Liwei. And as you probably know, they made an impressive stride, because in only 3 flights, they had 1 guy in space, then 2 guys during 5 days, I think. And then on the 3rd flight, they had a double extravehicular activity, which is the fastest pace ever in the history of manned spaceflight. So I think this had to be mentioned. Okay, so now I would like to ask to some of our panelists another question which many people are asking themselves: why did you wanted to become an astronaut? And I think that Valérie and Chiaki have already partly answered, but maybe not as clearly, Kadi and Thomas. So maybe you could say a few words on why you became an astronaut.
Well, when I was growing up, it wasn't something that girls typically did or dreamed about, even though boys did. And it wasn't until I was in college and I happened to go to a lecture much like this, given by Dr. Sally Ride, where I realized that she had this job where it counted that she was well educated, and she had an education that involved a lot of curiosity about the universe, but she also had a lot of adventure in her job. And I just thought, I want that job. But what's amazing to me is it really took seeing someone and having them seem real to me to aspire to this job. And it's one of the reasons that I think all of us here at IAC that are involved in the space program, no matter what job, whether it's astronaut or some other job, you need to realize that you can motivate people around the planet to become scientists and engineers just by being real to them. And I would say in particular, we need to emphasize that women and minorities need to have these jobs become a reality for them. And that's for the future of our planet. Thank you.
Yes, it's kind of similar to me. For me, the important event was really the moon landing. I was 11 years old, and I remember this very well. In Europe, it was after midnight, and I was my father woke me up, and we were watching that with our neighbors together. And that was really the moment when I was absolutely how shall I say, enchanted by this idea to pick up this profession. If I try to imagine to stand with my own feet on the surface of another celestial body that is still for me, as at that time, a couple of years ago, as fascinating. And that was the driver. I couldn't imagine that once, a couple of years later, I would actually get that chance. So I was very happy. And it was really becoming, a dream was becoming true. But I think something that is, as Kathy said, in all of us, all of those who are scientists who are exploring either in an abstract way by applying science or, let's say, by going with their own body into unknown terrain, I think this is the commonality. I remember having talked to some of the planetary scientists, and I maybe it's not true for all of them, but quite a lot times I've heard that they would give a lot to spend maybe 10 minutes on the surface of one of these celestial bodies that we are now investigating with robotic means, because we cannot reach them, by being there themselves, and that would probably save years and years of research. So anyhow, I think this is definitely something that is in our.
Can I interrupt? I'd like to interrupt. I have Mike Fossum from the space station on the phone.
Oh,
Mike, I'm going to put you on the speaker.
Perfect.
So, Mike, you're on the speaker. He was there.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the IAC. You have Mike Fossum, I'm the commander of Expedition 29, along with flight engineers Sergei Volkov and Satoshi Furukawa.
Can you hear? Hey, well, welcome to IAC. We're so glad that all of you are there. Anything you'd like to share with us? How was your day? And I'll tell you that we're going to show your aurora picture.
Oh, great. The aurora is not as busy today as it was a couple of weeks ago. We have a number of different science activities ongoing that we're taking care of. Satoshi and I have done a neurological study this morning, which those results are...
It's not... You guys can hear? Any questions for ISS?
The phone number, maybe.
Maybe Sergei would like to say a little bit in Russian as well, or Satoshi a greeting. Hello? Oh no, sometimes it happens that way. They call and then the line blinks out. You don't expect it, but if they call back, we'll say hello.
That's a great opportunity. Thanks.
There's still a lot of handover between crews that are there and crews that came back, and I just was sharing with Mike what we were doing, and he and his crew were excited about being part of the conference. So.
Well, that was absolutely fascinating and a very moving moment, I think. Huh? Okay, so I think that now we'll start with the questions from the audience. And one of the questions I think is very interesting. A lot of them are on the future, but this one is very interesting. It refers to the fact that all you have been flying with your country flags. So the question is, do you think that once there will be a kind of unified symbol for all astronauts? And by the way, there is a project on this which has been put up by the young generation, which is called the One Flag in Space. Yeah. Okay. So the question is, all astronauts, cosmonauts have been flying in space with the flag of their own country on their spacesuit. Don't you think that it would be interesting once later to have a kind of a symbol for, unified symbol for all astronauts and cosmonauts, like Space Young Generation is trying to promote with the program One Flag in Space?
Yeah, if he's there, actually, Kathy has Mike still on the.
So, Mike, the question is, Mike, if you guys can hear it, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
The question was whether we wanted to strive, correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, strive to have a common symbol of astronauts, cosmonauts, taekwonauts, everyone, instead of each of us having our own sort of symbols from our country. Should we strive to have one common core?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think that there's something to be said for having a common symbol for all spacefaring, individuals. I think on the same token, I think each country has the freedom and maybe the privilege of having their own symbols too. So I can see both angles to that. I wouldn't take a position on that. What about you?
Okay. Just say goodbye. And so we'll just sign off from here, and we appreciate you guys calling in. We know it's your lunchtime and you're busy, but we appreciate you calling in and saying hello to us. Folks are working real hard down here to do things together, and we know that you're just doing that by, just naturally up there. So thanks a lot for your hard work up there.
Okay. We're an international crew from 3 corners of the globe. We have a lot of activities going on right now in 4 different major laboratories on the space station. Sometimes it feels like we're jugglers as much as we are astronauts, cosmonauts. So thanks for the hard work down there, and really appreciate the support from everybody. Make it a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, so now we switch to questions on the future. And one of them, of course, is are we ready and in need for the next flights missions to Moon and Mars? And the question initially was posed to Kadi, but I think others would like to answer maybe.
На этот вопрос, я считаю, каждый должен отвечать в соответствии с своими представлениями. Вот в моем представлении Луна нам не нужна, там абсолютно нечего делать. На Марс, конечно, лететь надо. И я думаю, что к этому мы все будем готовиться вместе с американцами, с Европой, с Японией, наверное, может быть, с Китаем, но все вместе.
Different people have different ideas about what is the next destination for the humanity to go. Naturally, I have my own understanding. I believe that we can hardly do anything useful on the moon, so I would rather prefer Mars. And I actually believe that we need to go there all together. Russians, Americans, Japanese, all the nations, Europeans, and Chinese as well.
Но это я высказал собственное мнение. Оно в чем-то расходится с официальным мнением нашего руководства. Оно говорит, что им нужна Луна. Я не понимаю, зачем.
Actually, I expressed my personal opinion, and this is different from our management's opinion. They say they want to go to the moon, and I ask the question, why?
And I echo Mr. Ryuman that we need to do this together. I won't tell you my personal opinion, but I think what's important here is that the work that's been done together with many countries to make a roadmap that looks at asteroids, Moon, Mars, puts them in priorities that each country can live with in terms of their own economies, in terms of their own goals. And what I think is very positive is that we're making a roadmap together, And I look forward to together, meaning all the countries and not just the original International Space Station partners, but I'm glad to see other countries being added to the roadmap.
Yeah, if I may add a thought to that, I fully agree, of course. Exploration, I think, is an international endeavor, and we are pretty much on our way. Making up a kind of international exploration strategy already was elaborated by 14 different space agencies. Some of the space agencies are still missing, like China, India, but I'm sure that this is the path forward. An interesting question to be solved as well is, apart from the technical aspects, and the question who is contributing what in order to pursue this path, is the question of governance. And the International Space Station certainly is a good start. There are in total 15 countries are involved in the ISS, and I think this is already a very solid basis for the future. But I think if we really want to continue beyond low Earth orbit and do that in an international way, there are still some aspects to be thought at how we politically take the decision. And we heard already by Mr. Ryumin that there are, of course, preferences. We know there are a lot of potential destinations around. Moon is one of them, asteroids, the moons of Mars, Lagrange points. Not much more, though, because it will take probably a little bit longer until we might think of going beyond these distances or beyond these destinations. But the question, how do we choose, actually? And if I say we, it's most likely our political leaders who need to sit together and come to this conclusion, because they at the end need to get and to give the money to it. So that will be a very interesting aspect. I think in the meantime, the community, if I may call it like that, has a pretty good idea what is technically necessary. They have a pretty good idea what has been contributed, what has been developed in the meantime. We have a very highly developed space industry across the world, across the United States, Russia, China, India, in Europe, of course, and there is some kind of duplication which is always needed. We know in spaceflight we never operate without redundancies, but probably we don't need a too high level of duplication, and bringing that all together, I think we can get forward there pretty much. But the necessary political process, the question of how this can be agreed upon and how such an international endeavor can be then actually be governed is a very interesting aspect, and I think that is, apart from the technical things we still need to be solved, something we need to look at. Thank you.
Yeah, based on the success of these past 50 years of the human spaceflight, now I think we are in the very interesting time because it's a kind of transition phase, and the paradigm shift has expected. Like, well, we have already shifted like a national pride to the international cooperation, and now the international cooperation is necessary. So based on those situations, I have maybe suggest the 5 things toward the next stage of the exploration. Of course, we continue exploration. I think everybody agrees, because that's how we love space program. But usually exploration means explore very far away from Earth, but at the same time, explore Earth is one of the exploration. So like, for example, Kathy actually connected to the International Space Station guys with such a technology as a telephone. So to me, the next 50 years, boundary because Earth and space will be much less, because Earth is a part of the space environment. So here we are also in space. Earth environment in space. So exploration, continuous exploration to space as well as Earth is just one thing. And then the second thing is to take more interdisciplinary approach. Like not only the robotics, the human, but the technology and academy, or amongst academy, even the literature or those kinds, because the space program needs very much interdisciplinary program for future exploration. So the third is dedicated to the life innovation and green innovation. like disaster monitoring, climate change, or global health security, using pre-medicine, using the space medicine technique and also the Earth observation technique. And number 4, the promote commercialization. I think that is very, very important because like us, we had the national pride as the impetus for promoting the space program. I believe we need a very good, healthy competition amongst good companies. And then that is the one that I think we can promote the space program faster. And then the number 5, and the promotion of commercialization, of course, include space tourism, so that not only the professional astronauts, cosmonauts, but everybody who wish to fly will be able to fly if we have some commercialized program good established. The last but not least, I think toward the next stage of the exploration, we have to seek not only the tangible result, but also the non-tangible benefits from the space flight. Like sometimes education or human resource and also the international collaboration is very difficult to see compared to the technological tangible one. But I think the people becomes matured to work together as the international members. So now is a good time to seek for future to work with seeking more intangible result. So as a matter of fact, go back to the Gagarin's flight, I think one thing that Gagarin gave us, to me, the one of the best part was he reported our Earth is one Earth and then blue planet, and then which means we have to take care of this precious resource as our common source. That's how I think I see for future.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, actually, there are many questions on the future and the benefits of manned spaceflight, so maybe we'll come back a little later with the others who have not spoken about it. There is an interesting, more detailed question trying to put a timeline. When do you think that it will be possible to go on a deep space flight? It's pessimistic here, between 20 and 30 years from now. And another detailed question, what are the critical technologies for such deep space flight? Who would like to answer?
Okay, I think it's not so easy to give a time horizon when we will go into deep space. I mean, obviously the most striking destination, I think, is our neighboring planet Mars. And nowadays it's difficult to make a prognosis if that will be in the 30s, in the 40s, or whenever. It is sure that we need to take the first steps, and I think there we are already very well underway. First of all, when I was talking about the fora that are existing in order to look at exploration strategy, that look at destinations, at potential destinations, of course this goes along with looking at certain technologies that still need to be developed, and there are quite a variety of them where we need to advance. And there is one most common denominator that I would like to stress, that is that the International Space Station is not only a research laboratory to cover a wide spectrum of research topics that are now processed there, but also as a kind of test bed for developing these technologies. Obviously, there are, I mean, we can go to any detail, but the question of propulsion is still something that needs some advancements. We all know that mission to Mars can be quite long, the transient time from Earth to Mars, and that determines the overall duration of the mission. So if we can shorten that, this would be very important. You might be aware that there is still an analog study going on in Russia, Mars 500 study. These 6 crew members are so to say, back on their way from Mars. They will be back on Earth beginning of November, and they will have spent about 520 days in this simulation. Now, this is really a long time, and obviously propulsion is one of the areas where we still could envisage some advances. The next point is, of course, if you go beyond low Earth orbit, the logistics look quite differently, and you need to rely much more on regenerative systems, especially life support systems. The question, how can you, in which form can you bring food, especially water, and so forth. So life support systems, the advancement in life support system is another area. And the third area, which I think is one of the critical, once again, there are a lot more, is the question of radiation. While flying in low Earth orbit, we are still shielded by the Earth magnetic field. The radiation up there is about 100 times higher than here on ground in average. It depends on the solar activities. But if we are leaving low Earth orbit, if we are leaving the Earth magnetic field, obviously there will be a high exposure to radiation, and that is indeed something that still needs to be developed. And I know that ISS is already used to look into possibilities, new materials that are not too heavy, not putting thick lead plates to shield the astronauts from cosmic particles and radiation, but different areas. So I believe in the next years we will see steps in that direction. The ISS will play a role. I have, of course, my hopes that we will see in the next decade humans leaving again low Earth orbit to another destination, and I have my private preference, which is somehow connected with the experience I had when I was 11 years, but I could imagine that we see in the next decade humans leaving low Earth orbit. It will be an international endeavor. We will use ISS as a platform to develop these technologies. And I think as a last point, we need a kind of transportation architecture, an international transportation architecture that supports such mission. We have seen now that it can be quite critical if we have only one transportation system to fly to and from the International Space Station. And obviously, this situation will be overcome in not too far future. But I think especially if we are looking at missions to beyond low Earth orbit, we need to make use of a variety of transportation systems. And there is a lot around. The United States are developing the SLS. In Russia, Angara, Europe has a quite reliable launcher, the Ariane 5, which is delivering the ATV to the International Space Station. In China, we see there is a Long March, which is going, of course, in Japan, the HTV, which is providing logistics to the ISS. And I think if we put that in an overall architecture, we are not too far away from a scenario where we actually can step by step send humans beyond low Earth orbit to new destinations. However, as I mentioned before, this is a big political challenge to make the choice and to say, okay, our next destination is this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are running out of time, so I'm afraid we will not be able to answer all questions, so some selection. First, it seems that there are many astronauts and cosmonauts in the room. Could they raise their hand or stand up, please? Stand up. I see one here, for example. Well, some. Thank you. So now the traditional question of unmanned versus manned flights. I'm sure you have the answer, your own answer. So who can answer this question? Who would like to start? Kadi?
I'm not particularly interested in having manned flights. In fact, I make a joke, but, in terms of human spaceflight, I think we need to bring the whole family. I was asked recently about my opinion on demanning the space station, and I said, well, I flew with 5 guys, one of which is here, and every day was amazing, but there were some times every once in a while when I would dream of demanning the space station. But we do need to bring the whole family. And in terms of manned versus robotic, you know, it takes both. We need to use the technical know-how that we have in terms of robotics and develop what we don't have so that we can test the waters and send people, you know, off into places where we know they're going to return as well. And to me, it's we absolutely need both manned and unmanned, and any separation between the two or people thinking you have to choose is unacceptable because we need both.
Я считаю, что должно быть разумное сочетание и беспилотных, и пилотируемых полетов.
I believe it should be a reasonable combination of robotic flights and human flights.
Any other? It's okay. Okay, there is another detailed question which is interesting about the optimum size for any crew to Mars mission and NEO mission, Near Earth Objects mission. What is your opinion about the optimum size for the crew, if any has?
Well, I think that 3 has been working pretty well for us. I think that there's always chances in a social way for the, you know, who is closer to who and one person getting to be alone. I just think it's a nice combination, but I haven't flown alone as a group of 3 for very long, and there might be others that have an opinion about whether 3 is the right number.
Yeah, I would imagine that the question how big the crew will actually be on a mission that will go beyond low Earth orbit depends, of course, a little bit on the technical conditions. It depends on the amount of supplies we need to take, and I agree with Kathy. I mean, the number 3 has proven to work very well so far. But I mean, if we are sending people to a mission that will last for definitely longer than a year, maybe even more than 2 years, it probably is of advantage to have more than 3 people for various reasons. But once again, I mean, there are social aspects, psychological aspects that need to be taken into consideration. I mean, a simple question like, should it be an even or an odd number? Because obviously there might be situations arising where obviously we need one commander who is setting the path. The question, how is the combination of men and women? Do we need a dedicated medical officer or a medical doctor for that? I think at the moment there are, or there have been already quite a lot of thought spent to this question, how many people we can send. At the end, it will be significantly determined by the technical frame conditions, how we are able to establish the logistics for a long-term mission, if it really should go to a destination that is far beyond even the moon.
Thank you. Maybe Shaki? Okay. Okay, so we are coming to the final question, and they concern globally the future of human spaceflight over the next 50 years, for example, and notably what could be the place of non-professional astronauts, if any. So I think all 4 of you should try to answer, if possible, the future of human spaceflight and commercial versus industry, state support.
Well, I think I heard a lot of questions in there, really. The future of spaceflight, commercial versus government, and professional versus non-professional. First, I'll say that I'm sure that every person that goes to orbit is going to be professional, you know, in terms of their conduct and also their aspirations. Certainly, we've seen that here in South Africa with, you know, the people from South Africa who've flown. I think that going to space is so special. I welcome the chance for anyone to go, and I am sure that when they go and they look back at the planet, they come back here and they make a difference. And I'm just in favor of giving people what they need to make that difference in terms of commercial versus government. In the United States, I think it's time to use what the commercial industry brings to us in terms of their flexibility, their expertise, their mobility, and their willingness to use the lessons learned already in the government, and yet they can be a little bit quicker in the way they implement things. And I'm very excited about these commercial endeavors and excited to see as they go step by step, and the steps are coming very quickly.
I really encourage commercial flight. And the situation is to me, the definition of the professional astronaut and the tourists is easy, because right now the access is very limited. Only the supported the companies, the government or agencies, the big ones, can send the human beings into space. But if we have more access and then less expensive way to go into space, everybody who wish to go to space can go. In that case, the professional astronaut, somebody pay for this travel fee into space, which means we have to work because it's a business trip to space, right? But if you pay for the space the trip, you can use the opportunity in any case, sightseeing, education, do some experiments, or any kind, because that's your money comes from your own pocket. So that's how I think professional versus the tourist works for the future. And I hope that more and more people, as a tourist level, like we fly into the commercial airline, can come true. Like a pilot or a flight attendants will be the professional airline workers. And then if you pay first class, business class, and coach class, depends on what you fly, and then you can enjoy your flight. That's the way that the next 50 years we have to have. Thank you.
So anybody would, okay, please, quickly.
Yes, I only can agree to what Kathy and Chiaki has said. I really believe that all of us who had the chance to look at our own planet from this unique perspective, they returned, of course, with a different view. And I think these impressions that we have gotten there, they accompany us for the rest of our lives. And therefore, I can really agree that this would be fantastic. The more people that can make such a trip, but have such an experience, it will have a really an important influence on life here on Earth. If you can look over whole continents with just one view, and for me, being from Europe, when we are coasting over Europe, you see the whole continent basically in your view. It is just a fantastic feeling. We all know how Europe looks on the map, but once you have seen it with your own eyes, it changes your approach to all the things that are going on this continent, and not only on a continent, on this planet. And I think that would be very, very beneficial for the future. And that actually is one of the reasons why it would be so advantageous to have this process accelerated. Now, we all know that it's technically quite a step, and still, even with the new companies that are developing here, it's still not as inexpensive as taking a trip to the Mediterranean, but it is a start, and it's important that we progress there.
Thank you. So very quickly, yes or no, do you believe, so you see this chart on the future with, let's say, the suborbital things on the left and the orbital things on the right. Do you think that there is a real important market for the suborbital flights, which is just shaping up now? Yes? You all? Okay. Well, I think we have to close the session now. So as you see on the conclusive chart, what is interesting to be noted is that you have the NASA program Orion here. But on the right, you have private companies showing up, as everybody has seen recently. And what is also interesting is that new countries have big plans for spaceflight, like India, who wants to be on the moon around 2020, and China around 2030. So it looks like we have a big future for human spaceflight. So thank you very much, and I think we have to give a big round of applause to our astronauts there. And thanks a lot for the incredible connection to the station. Double applause.